national address yakataurwa na president. And in that, I think, if we recap, he mentioned that there is an expectation that the growth rate will be 6.6 for 2025. A jobless growth rate is not a growth rate at all. Because if there was growth rate, how come that the majority of Zimbabweans are still flocking into South Africa to buy goods, are still flocking into neighboring countries to look for jobs? It doesn't matter, all our neighbors, any young person in Zimbabwe, after graduating, they would rather be out of the country looking for jobs. So we can't really talk about a growth rate of 6.6 in a country where there's no one single company that can boast to have 30,000 employees, 40,000 employees, or 10,000 employees. I think at one stage, Econet was the biggest employer, but I don't know even if they've got 5,000 employees on their books. So I think the biggest challenge is that we have people in government, and I'm hoping that the president is not being misled into lying that there's growth rate in Zimbabwe. There's no growth rate in Zimbabwe. And one of the highlights he mentioned in the State of the Nation address was the ZIG, which they claimed is backed by the gold, solid gold. The sovereignty of a country is determined by one thing in addition to others in terms of the territorial independence, is the strength of the currency. Now, we cannot talk about the ZIG if the ZIG is not in the hands of the people. If you go to a shop, people are not using the ZIG in the shops. People are not using the ZIG to pay for transport. So again, and this is a tragedy. The tragedy is that ZANU-PF have been lying to the masses of Zimbabwe for a very long time. We had bond notes, bond coins, and so on. Now, if we go to the service stations and you say, here's a ZIG, there's no ZIG. So I think, and I pray to God that the Minister of Finance, Professor Mnangagwa, will whisper in the ears of the President that the ZIG is in name only. It's not being used in Zimbabwe. There's no confidence. People don't trust their own money. And I think it's high time that the government, which is run by ZANU-PF, understands that the time to continue propagating the lies that Zimbabwe will be better under the leadership of ZANU-PF is a total lie. Then there's the issue of infrastructure. So when we talk about infrastructure, what type of infrastructure are we talking about? Because the only thing we have seen is an attempt to construct some few national roads. There's some few roads that have been mentioned going to Vic Falls and other parts of the country. But South Africa is our largest trading partner. And there's a road that has been under construction between Harare and Beitbridge through Masvingo. That road will never complete. Even up to the 2030, so-called 2030 vision, that road will never be complete. By the time they finish completing that road, the parts that should have been completed would need resurfacing. So again, this is really misleading, where we are told of massive infrastructure, but for 5 years or 7 years, we failed to complete one road, Harare Beitbridge via Masvingo, which is about 600 kilometers. So if it takes 10 years plus to build one road, how long is it going to take to build a road between Harare and Nyamapanda, between Harare, Chirundu, between Harare and other parts of the country. But roads is not the only infrastructure. Where are the hospitals? Where are the dams? Where are the factories? A road must lead to a point of production. And these roads are leading to areas of consumption because we're a consumption country. So we're building roads to be able to go and buy things in Botswana, Zambia, and South Africa. Then there's also the issue that was highlighted of land reform. Land reform must have a finite period. We've been talking about land reform for a very long time. And in this, the highlight is that they say they're going to give people title deeds so that it's bankable. I can tell Zimbabweans today that this is for convenience. This whole bill is really to empower the elite that got land for free during the land reform program that started in 2000. So they can monetize the lands they are not supposed to monetize. So this is another hoax, I believe, is being perpetuated by ZANU-PF, trying to give people false hope, the hope we had in 1918. They cannot sell land they didn't buy. You have seen that between Harare and Norton, they are all houses. And that was a very productive agricultural land, which was used for horticulture. For any piece of land today, they are building homes. And unfortunately, because they don't have the foresight, they're doing horizontal development. Yet in developed countries, you go upwards. Because land is also a depleting asset. We need to use land for food security, for production, rather than to say everywhere they're just building houses, and in those houses there's no water, there's no sewage, there's no bulk infrastructure that is being done there. And that's the same thing you've seen with the mountains. They are destroying everything, just giving houses. Yet we need the land for agriculture. Now, if you push the land that was used for agriculture or horticulture to do tomatoes, vegetables, and so on, and you put them far and far, it means the cost of distribution is going to be higher, which means the food prices in Harare in the future will be higher. So really for me, this whole title deeds issue is for them and their children to be able to monetize the land they got for free and build houses, not factories, not production for our children, which is really what they're telling people and saying, in all the growth points, now let's build towns. So there's a lot of migration into the so-called new urban areas. And as far as I can see, these growth points are no longer growth points, but they are concentration camps. Because there's only drugs that is happening there. There's no recreational centers. Any open space they get in Zimbabwe and in Harare is being built for houses. So where do our children play? I mean, we have a country that has got 17 million people with no national sports stadium for soccer where we can play football in the country. The national team has to play its home games away in South Africa. And then they talk about development, then they talk about Agenda 2030. So the whole State of the Nation address is a repetition of false promises that started in particular 1997. Before we could say, let's give them a chance. That is ZANU-PF. But from 1997, there's been false promise after another false promise, which have taken us now to Agenda 2030. We don't belong, the majority of people don't belong to ZANU-PF. But I want to acknowledge that they had their conference in Manicaland, and it's proposed that the president's term be extended to 2030. Now, if you were to take 1980 to 2030, that's 50 years, that's half a century. Now, in 1980, we had Bob Marley, who came to sing on our independence, for the independence of Zimbabwe. If Bob Marley was alive 50 years later in 2030, and ZANU-PF is in power, and President Mnangagwa is the president of Zimbabwe, he would not come to that. I can promise you that. I don't know, but I can tell you, if Bob Marley were alive, and he would be invited to say, come and celebrate the 50th half-a-century celebration of the independence of Zimbabwe, Bob Marley would say, I'd rather be dead than to come to Zimbabwe 50 years later, when possibly Zimbabweans are looking for redemption. Zimbabweans are looking for salvation. Zimbabweans are looking for freedom. Zimbabweans are looking for total self-determination and actualization. So I want to say to those who are supporting the 2030 agenda that Zimbabweans are very afraid and scared. They're scared because of the menace of ZANU-PF. A lot of young people have gone out of the country seeking for greener pastures. Now, if you were to then analyze the definition of crime against humanity, the policies that have been followed by ZANU-PF, the government of Zimbabwe, can actually amount to acts what we call an act against humanity. Because we are pushing young people, because when you have forced removal, when you have a lot of people moving, displaced, and this is not voluntary because it's economic. So this is economic migration, right? Okay? So there's no difference, right? So when a large number of people are displaced from their place where they have got peace and can be with their families, that is forced removal, which we have seen also with the mining activities we are told that are happening where there's no rehabilitation, there's a lot of deforestation. So when the settlers came into Africa, our forefathers were forcibly removed from the land. Today, the current leaders are giving the land to the Chinese willingly. And the Chinese are abusing our people. We believe that it's now time for the majority of Zimbabweans to be able to live in peace. And we also want to say it's now time for the majority of Zimbabweans to have total self-determination, to begin that process of total self-determination. So people have looked at the Constitution to say, well, is it possible that, willingly the Constitution can be changed and the 2030 agenda? But we want to make a proposal. This is very simple. So we don't want a referendum. We don't want anything. If they believe in their leader, ZANU-PF, they believe whoever they put as their best person, okay, let's contest elections in 2028. So instead of saying, I want to extend for 2 years from 2028 to 2030, why can't you just contest in a democratic process so you can get another 5 years? Through the will of the people, democratic, mass vote. So we don't want people to extend through the back door, through manipulation and so on. So Zimbabweans, let's not be fooled. One term is too many. We were fooled in 2017 where certain people thought or wanted to make people believe Mugabe, the late President Mugabe, was the problem. We've realized that Mugabe was never the problem. The problem is the party he left. That is the problem. So when we do any eulogy to RG Mugabe, we must do a eulogy to ZANU-PF too, because the soul of ZANU-PF went with Mugabe. So Zimbabweans, I want to say this to you, because I love you so dearly. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to try and preach to make sure we open your minds and ears. That let's not be fooled by any referendum. If they want to put any person, they must put the person, but there must be elections in 2028. We're going to do everything legal through all the different platforms where Zimbabwe is a member, the African Union, SADC, to make sure that we stop this process in its tracks. What we will not stop is for them to put a candidate forward. But elections in 2028 must happen. Zimbabweans are tired. They are afraid. The blood pressure is so high. Zvinonzi vanhu vatova ne-BP ne-ZANU-PF. Saka nguva yeruzhinji yasvika. Gore reshanduko rave kusvika in 2028. Hatina kusikirwa kuti titambudzike upenyu hwedu hwose. Handizive kuti kuna Mwari here kana kuti kuna Allah, nokuti tinopa mazita akasiyana. Chandinoziva ndechokuti kune musiki akasika munhu anofema ane mwoyo asiri chimudhori kana an object. Saka toda kuudza ivo varipo muhurumende kuti aiwa tiri vanhuwo tine ropa, tinorwadzikwa. Nguva yeruzhinji yasvika. I think tikakwanisa kuti tiudze vanhu kuti kana tichitaura mashoko aya hazvisi kureva kuti hatisi kuziva matambudziko arimo. Matambudziko ari munyika haana kubva kumusiki kana kudenga, abva muwanhu, abva kuZANU-PF. Saka zivai chakutambudzai. Ziva kuti dambudzo riri kubva kupi munyika muno. Kuti mai vari kuAustralia, baba vari kuJoburg, wokutanga ari muMozambique, wokupedzisira ari muBotswana, vese vari kungosunza kutsvaga kurarama. Vari muno vakasara, ukaenda mumhuri ukati nhasi unganidzai $5, vari 5 mumba imomo, baba namai nevana vatatu, $5 haibudi, nokuti zvinhu zvakaoma. Saka ndiri kuda kuti ndikurudzire vanhu veZimbabwe kuti ngatibatanei, ngatishandei pamwe chete, ngativhure maziso tione ari kutishungurudza, ari kukonzera dambudziko munyika. Isu tinoti upenyu kuvanhu, upfumi munyika, impilo ebatwini, inoto elezwini. Ndoda kutenda zvikuru kana pana nemubvunzo, feel free.
Maybe the very tail end of your message, when you say ngati shandei pamwe chete, ngati batanei, I want to understand the meaning of that message, because only yesterday or day before we had more like a coming together of different politicians, opposition politicians who came together to voice more or less the same message that you have presented to us, but you were absent from that conference. Could there be a reason of your absence, or maybe what would you say? Because I'm taking it from where you have said Ngati Pamochete, Ngati Batane, but you were absent when all of these politicians came together to speak the very same message that you are speaking on your own today.
The same objectives. My standing here is not grandstanding. I've shown my consistency in terms of my message to the nations where they can hear what I've said, but also to those in government. The betrayal of Zimbabwe started in 1986 by ZANU-PF, and I said that, and I've said that. If you Google, I think in 2015, I did mention that this whole succession battle in ZANU-PF, it can just happen. But when you talk about democracy, I said I will be the second democratically where people are very happy and confident to be the president of Zimbabwe. Anything that has happened in between, is just a facade, right? It's a facade. Because we know that that whole process was never democratic. So I don't know who convened the meeting you're talking about, and I was not invited. Had I been invited, I would have attended. That's the first point. Also understanding the agenda. But we talk about peace and everything else, but also understand the venue was bombed. So we can't talk about peace, which the president talks about, and unity. When in a democratic country where we're supposed to exercise freedom of speech, assembly, and movement, we get places to be bombed. But it also is my trust that the authorities, that is the police and investigators, will be able to find the culprits of that and find what was the reason and get to the bottom of it.
My question to you, President, you are aware that Aston happened, and there have been reports indicating that those who are perceived to be challenging the 2030 agenda are being targeted. My question to you is, you're addressing us in a press conference right now. Are you also not afraid of the violence that is happening in the country?
And fear. A lot of people have come before us, they've sacrificed their lives and died. So I've mentioned that my brothers were in the war, my uncles, they died. I also can mention that I was a proper Mjiba during the liberation struggle, so I'm not scared. So I'm not scared of any violence. I'm only sometimes want to engage in intellectual debates that takes us forward. So it's only cowards that resort to violence. And I'm not a coward because I engage. I don't talk about subversion or overthrowing a government undemocratically. That's why I'm saying those that believe are liked by the people, let's contest in 2028. That's my message. But death is death. But we know it happened. They had a conference where it was suggested that the president's term be extended by 2 years to 2030 to complete his 2030 vision, whatever that is. So I'm not part of them, so I don't know how serious they are, but we've been reading through the media which you write, and we thank you for sometimes for informing us that there's this 2030 vision, there's this Idiano Tonga, there's this and that. So we've read that from you, because you, the guys who are allowed to attend many meetings, and I'm sure you attended that conference as well, right? Okay, but that's their problem. We have a constitution. I know they've never respected. They've never even one single day upheld this constitution. And this is just a book they wrote to lie to us because they didn't. Because the president should not be president because the constitution has not been consistently upheld all the time. In any democratic country, when you don't uphold the constitution and the laws, then you get impeached or you get removed. We've seen in Britain, a prime minister can come for 45 days, even to just say we're going to raise taxes or to lower taxes, they resign. Boris Johnson, I think, was forced to resign because he attended a party during COVID. That's accountability and responsibility. Now, do I see 2030 agenda happening in terms of extending the president's term unconstitutionally? Okay? No, we're going to fight. That's why we said there are legal processes and channels will be able to engage to make sure that does not happen. So I'm also inviting and asking them that if you are so loved by the people of Zimbabwe, why can't you just have the elections in 2028 and then they can vote for you? If they love you so much, why do you need to change? Why do you need to say, no, just give me 2 more years, or let's give this one 2 years, when there's an opportunity to be given another 5 years by democratic vote? So if he wants, Mr. President Mnangagwa, if you want to be president for life, we don't have a problem. But contest elections every 5 years. That's the condition. Contest fairly, where there are no intimidation, there's no mechanization, and even this whole, it used to be called POSA, where we say if you want to have a meeting, we must have people from the president's office. That's already intimidation. Why would you want to have certain people who don't belong to you to come and listen to your conversation? Those are some of the reforms we're talking they must go, because we're not going to talk about anything dangerous. So please leave us in peace and freedom to be able to exercise our fundamental rights, human rights, and to live in peace. Because to have free and fair elections is not an event, it's a process. It starts now. So we are tired. And this is really my message. And I'll be very direct to ZANU-PF. We are tired. Zimbabweans have seen lots of suffering. Those 43 people that died 3 weeks ago on the bus, their souls, the hate of their families and friends. Please just think for them for a moment. Thank you. God bless you.